Can you hint at any of the other spin-offs we're going to see?
Not right now. There were 14 stories written. So, and there was some
work
good
to be
stuff.
done.
And there was good stuff. Yeah. So, I would like to do one of them, though.
Have you ever written something and questioned whether it's good enough to show others and you're kind of embarrassed of the work that you did? Well, if I'm being completely honest, I don't think there's better motivation to get over that slump than Michael Bay. A man who gets ripped apart film after film, yet film after film he gets another chance to work on his story. Film after film he has a 4-day stay at his bank while they deposit his money. And film after film, he's doing what he loves to do. But as I said with my Fast and Furious video, there's still a lot to learn from this franchise, because, let's be honest, no one is forcing us to watch these movies, yet we do, and we complain. We rip on Michael Bay, but it's not like the man is purposely setting out to make a bad movie. He legit likes what he's doing. He just doesn't have a sense of humor. So I've gotten to the point where I've learned to accept the movies. I don't like them, let me make that very, very clear. That last one was some serious dookie, but I've decided to study them and see what makes them successful, even if I doubt that any of the 14 upcoming sequels and spin-offs will be any good. So, number 1, learn to copy other properties. There's that thing that always goes around that there's just so many stories, and honestly, if you see a bunch of movies, especially some from great directors, they either pay homage or they kind of rip off a little bit of other movies, and Transformers isn't any different. Obviously, the writers will never admit to these, but considering they work in the film industry, they're not oblivious to what they're ripping off, especially when they straight up address it in the movie. I mean, they try to play the Game of Thrones in the intro by upping up Khaleesi's 3 dragons with a 3-headed robo-dragon. If the King Arthur movie from earlier this year didn't do it for you, then they also cover that too, which I'll actually give Bay credit for, since he was rumored to do that feature, but then things fell through, but the sly guy was still able to find a way to sneak it into this movie. However, I'm not giving him credit on recasting Stanley Tucci when he was already a character in the last one. We do have the straight up robotic Suicide Squad team that comes out of nowhere, and for whatever reason the Decepticons all need to be black stereotypes. They blatantly rip off C-3PO with this character, which the writers even address themselves through dialogue. They knock off one of their own previous characters. They repeat one of their own previous storylines. And above all, they've entered that mystical land of the cinematic universe as they too try to play catch up with their 14 upcoming movies. And where, get this, Transformers helped Harriet Tubman build the Underground Railroad. I mean, Paramount already ruined Noah with the rock monsters, so I guess they're just continuing this blasphemy with Transformers owning slaves. Number 4 is the power of nostalgia. Again, some people may see the previous thing as a bad thing, when to others, they kind of like that there's bits and pieces of other movies, and who am I to complain considering that it actually works for them and they're on their 5th movie? But the power of nostalgia is something that we've seen with Jurassic World, with Power Rangers and what they tried to do, Star Wars and what they always do, and it's something that Transformers has as well, having people who love the cartoons from back in the day continue to watch their movies. A lot of us film fans complain and give the movies low scores and tend to forget that it doesn't affect it at all. I know people who grew up with the show and the toys, and they adore these movies. I know people who enjoy them just because it takes them back to the premiere of the first one in high school. So as much as we complain and rant, it'll never defeat the power of nostalgia and the fan base it already has, because that's the most important part of the franchise. But at number 3 is what's even better than nostalgia, and that's the foreign markets. If you watch my channel, you know I'm not the biggest fan of product placement when it takes you out of the movie, but foreign marketing, yo, this is the next big thing. We've seen it with Jurassic World and how that was able to make bank. We've seen it with the Fast and Furious franchise. We've seen it with Avengers. And heck, even movies that failed domestically here in the States, like The Mummy and Warcraft, made serious bank overseas. China and other markets have created a brand new landscape where the focus has become more global than domestic, and the reason why this is the big deal is because that affects movies and it affects different cuts that we get depending on where they play that movie. I mean, you may have noticed that some scenes may seem a little choppy here and there, or there's an actor that seems to be very important on screen, but you have no idea who they are, but they're important actors in another country and they're bringing in that entire audience. I think as studios get more dependent on markets outside of America, we're gonna see some very different stories popping up since the US of A ain't the only one to please anymore. What won't change though is number 2, and that is giving people a reason to go to the theater. I made a video on the debate between the cinema experience and the streaming experience, and while I myself am that hipster who vapes out of pristine 35mm reels, I can definitely see why people only dish out cash for the big ones. Most indies don't really need a big screen, and sadly their marketing usually sets them up to fail or get lost during their theater runs. But blockbusters, those are the moneymakers. We all know no one's looking for some Shakespeare-level dialogue from Bumblebee. Mark Wahlberg isn't gonna Daniel Day-Lewis it, but what people do want is explosions and a reason to spend money on a bigger screen and sound. Again, I prefer the indies, but the box office speaks for what the people really want. It's not just the studios forcing it down your throat, it's people going out of their way to buy it, and that's what brings in money for the studios. So my final and biggest point is that while I'm not a fan of really any of the 5 movies that have been released so far, I am a fan of other Paramount movies. And it's because of the big blockbusters and the money that they make for the studios and the way that the studio is modeled that they're able to make a profit and build budgets for other movies like the Cloverfield franchise or Arrival. And if it's because of Optimus Prime that I get to see a top 10 movie that makes it at my end of the year list, then it's worth it. My only question is, with all this money for a budget, why haven't we gotten Bad Boys 3 yet?